Uzumaki is hailed as the greatest horror manga of all time by critics and fans alike. But is it really the best of all time? Is it even that good? Uzumaki takes place in a small coastal town, which is cursed. The story follows Kirigoshima, who is a teenage girl that serves as the protagonist. The town is plagued by haunting spirals, which destroy every aspect of normal life for the citizens. At first, things start off small, with Kiri's friend's father becoming obsessed with spirals, but things spiral out of control, and spoilers, but the town gets destroyed. The concept is simple, but it allows the author, Junji Ito, to really express his artistic skills. When it comes to horror mangakas, there's no denying that Ito is one of the best. His style is very distinct, with characters looking more realistic than the usual stylized style that most mangakas go for. This is pretty common in horror manga though, as it adds to the seriousness of the content. In contrast to this, some horror mangakas will go for a very cute aesthetic in order to create a juxtaposition between the content and the art. This is meant to make readers feel unsettled. Ito utilizes this principle, but in a different, more thematic way. In Japanese culture, spirals are often seen as cute and innocent, but in Uzumaki, which literally translates to spiral, Ito warped them into something creepy and monstrous. By taking something innocent and making it evil, Ito is able to make the readers feel uncomfortable. Another thing he excels at is body horror. Once again, Ito takes something familiar, this time being the human form, and makes it into something creepy. He builds on the previously mentioned spiral concept, and contorts people into variations of this pattern. He does this in several ways, such as making a man literally become a spiral, as well as turning people into animals that are associated with spirals, like snails. Because Ito uses the spiral concept, he's able to create striking art and imagery. The spirals also help Ito with the manga's paneling. In manga and comics, paneling is important as it helps guide the reader's eye from image to image. If the paneling is bad, people will have no idea what to read next. If the paneling is average, you don't notice it at all, and will enjoy the manga. But if the paneling is excellent, it will feel like a seamless read. Paneling is also important for pacing. For fast-paced scenes, dynamic paneling helps, because it can guide your eyes from panel to panel faster. Ito does this well, as he used dynamic paneling during intense sequences. The reason I mentioned the spirals in context with the paneling is how spirals are very good at guiding the eye. Because of this, the way he places each spiral helps the reader unconsciously navigate each scene. I feel like a lot of people would miss this, and I think it should be acknowledged and praised. Before we get into the things that aren't done so well, let's examine one of the main topics of conversation regarding Uzumaki, which is what do the spirals mean? A lot of people theorize that they could come from aliens or some sort of cosmic being. They could also have a more philosophical meaning, like representing the warping of something positive into something negative. This can be seen in several chapters, like chapter 11, where mothers care for their babies spirals out of control, turning them into monsters. It's more complicated than that though, I just don't want to spoil anything. Overall, there's no definitive answer as to what the spirals really mean, and it is left up to the reader's interpretation. While there is a lot that Ito does well, there are some negative things that should be considered. The story begins with the protagonist witnessing a horrific event, and while things start off on a small scale, they eventually escalate. At first, they begin to impact the protagonist on a personal level, but eventually, the horrors affect everyone in the vicinity, with the story ending with the protagonist left in a hopeless situation. The thing is, this is the Junji Ito formula. The vast majority of his stories follow this formula. Granted, it is a common pattern to follow for cosmic horror stories, but the thing is, Ito rarely innovates on this, and it results in the story being predictable and feeling a bit lazy. Around a year ago, I read every Junji Ito manga for a video I ended up scrapping, and so many of his manga just follow this formula. Overall, Ito is sort of lacking in the story department, and Uzumaki is no exception to this. Another common criticism that this manga garners is the characters. The protagonist is pretty bland and generic, but in the case of a horror story, sometimes it is good to have an everyman type character that the reader can insert themselves into. This could better help immerse the reader into the story. There is also Suichi, who has this deeper connection to the spiral than most other people. Outside of them, the characters really aren't all too deep. They are sort of just caricatures of everyday archetypes. One final major criticism of Uzumaki that I'd like to discuss is the horrific events. Some of these events are a lot more weird or lame than horrific. For instance, in chapter 6, the protagonist has a spiral hair battle with another girl, and it's just rather silly. Chapter 8 is also kind of a mess, featuring a dude and his bully, who get turned into snails and have gay snail intercourse. This is a product of the insane mind of Junji Ito. Overall, at the end of the day, the horror elements are the most subjective thing about this, so what may not appeal to me or other readers could definitely be something that creeps you out. To summarize, the art, the paneling, and concepts are done well, but the story and characters are a bit lacking. So, is Uzumaki the greatest horror manga of all time, like some people say? Well, in my opinion, Uzumaki suffers from a pretty common phenomenon in the anime manga community. Usually, most people who become big anime fans want to dabble in a bit of manga. They often go to rating sites like AniList or MyAnimeList, or just the front page of Google, where there will be a list of a few specific manga, and many of these lists credit Uzumaki as being one of the best. Because of that, Uzumaki has pretty much just become very popular. But how did it even get on those lists in the first place? Well, not a lot of horror manga get official translations. When you go to like a chain bookstore like Barnes & Noble, you'll usually find shonen and shoujo rom-coms dominating the shelves. Because of this, the accessibility of horror manga is pretty low, with people having to rely on fan translations to read them. Junji Ito serves as an outlier to this, with many of his works being translated, especially in the early and mid-2000s. This is because not all of his works are made for a specifically adult audience, and they can be enjoyed by horror fans of all ages. Similarly, his art is some of the most compelling art in all of manga. So, after English publishers took a chance on translating his works, they saw a lot of success in the West. In contrast, a lot of other horror mangaka have not really had the same opportunities as Ito. For example, Masaki Nakayama has been creating horror manga for the last 30 years, with art and concepts that are on par with Junji Ito's, yet he has not seen any major success in the West until earlier this year. Also, I was recommending his stuff before the blow-up. Personally, I feel that if other mangakas had the same opportunities as Ito did, I'd be talking about a different manga today. As established earlier, Uzumaki is one of the most popular horror manga, and it is one of the only horror manga that non-hardcore manga fans really read. Because of this, almost every horror manga gets compared to Uzumaki, and you'll find loads of reviews saying that stories are just Uzumaki ripoffs. Again, I'll use Nakayama as an example. PTSD Radio is a horror manga that uses Japanese folklore and mysteries to tell a non-linear horror story about how the actions from the past can impact the present. Its main goal is to slowly build up anxiety for small, creepy scares. As you can tell, it sounds nothing like Uzumaki. Unfortunately, not a lot of people agree with us on that one, and Nakayama gets called an Ito ripoff by people who don't even read manga, let alone horror manga. Tangent over. So is Uzumaki really that good? It isn't the greatest horror manga of all time, let alone Ito's best. In terms of art, Ito's craft has significantly improved over the course of the last 25 years, and his more recent stuff blows Uzumaki away in that kind of artistic sense. His writing has also improved as well. After Uzumaki, he created Gyo, which follows the usual formula, but after that, it feels like he really tried to innovate instead of following the formula that had proven to work. Uzumaki is a solid horror manga, but Ito, as well as his contemporaries, have made much better works. Just read more horror manga. You'll get what I mean. At the end of the day, though, a lot of this boils down to subjectivity, and to be completely transparent, I feel like I've seen it all in horror manga, and nothing really just phases me anymore. Please let me know what you think on Uzumaki or not. I know a lot of people really hold this manga close to them, and my opinion is probably pretty different from most other people's. Anyways, thank you guys for your recent support. Later, gamers.